This show has been all Phil Ivey. He's up over 330,000.
All in.
What?
Phil Ivey's arguably the greatest of all time.
Just a very intense and aggressive player. He's always a threat in tournament poker.
I wanted to win so bad, I paid attention to every single detail.
And Phil Ivey joins the likes of Stu Unger, Ted Forrest, and Chris Ferguson with 5 World Series bracelets. It's an ace!
I went through a phase where I wasn't trying very hard. I didn't realize how hard I tried.
Phil Ivey's intimidating. Watching him on TV as a fan to getting to play against him online and play with him in person, and even after getting to know him personally a little bit, still sitting across the table from him, it's intimidating. And I think it's a lot of elements that add up to his greatness, but everybody agrees that he's just excellent at reading people.
$1 million first place money?
The most iconic Ivey hand to me of all time is that hand from Monte Carlo where he just doesn't believe Paul Jackson.
Pair of jacks and a 7. 80,000 is the bet.
And look at this, re-raise by Jackson.
Wow.
So what the heck is he doing?
Question is, what are you overthinking?
A re-raise.
Well, there you are. Re-raises to 320,000. It's right back in the face of Paul Jackson.
Nice. Oh my goodness, Jackson is re-raising. I don't see how he can possibly continue in this hand.
All in.
What? That's why we're here and they're there. Phil Ivey is the guy who did not blink.
Watching this hand was like witnessing great art. It's absurd and wonderful at the same time.
The first time I heard of Phil Ivey was when I saw him play in the main event in 2003 when Chris Moneymaker won and kind of the poker boom started. At this point, I was a fan. I didn't play poker. I didn't really know what I was doing, but still watching him play, hearing the commentators talk about the way that he played, he seemed impressive.
The hands of Phil Ivey, one of the great young superstars of poker.
Just a very intense and aggressive player who knows how to read other players, and he's equally difficult to read for the other players, so he's always a threat in tournament poker.
The most impressive to me, what really stood out and burned into my memory was when, very deep in the tournament, he, I believe, final table bubbled on a really bad beat.
It's an ace!
An incredible knockout blow for probably the best player left in the tournament.
So he got his money in great. It didn't work out. He lost. And I had seen other people throughout the main event broadcast celebrate when they won. I'd see people get upset when they lost. And this was a massive, massive spot where he lost and he just took a game and walked away. That absolutely was etched into my mind. In my eyes and the eyes of all my peers, there were really only 2 guys that were playing online and also playing in the big televised cash games who were really, really good, and that was Patrick Antonius and Phil Ivey. But Patrick started online, whereas Phil Ivey was really the only true live first crusher online, and he didn't just crush online, he was the biggest winner online for years and years and years. I was playing my low stakes and I watched him on high stakes poker, I watched him on TV poker, and he was just this enigma that was so calm and quiet at the tables, but played a really aggressive, really tough style. And it was very clear, so obvious that he had the respect of everybody at the table.
Phil Ivey is definitely the best all-around poker player in the world. He's the most feared player pretty much in any game.
And Phil Ivey joins the likes of Stu Unger, Ted Forrest, and Chris Ferguson with 5 World Series bracelets.
I think you see a lot of great players at the table, like Patrick Antonius and Tom Dwan, but until Phil Ivey's knocked off that pedestal, I don't see anyone else challenging him yet.
My most memorable hand against Phil Ivey is definitely the first time that we played 300-600. It's the first time I ever played 300-600 no limit online. I sat down with him heads up, and it was about 3 hands into the heads up match. I was dealt pocket 4s in the big blind. He raised the small blind, I called. Flop was 10-9-4, two-tone, and I check raise. He puts in the 3 bets. I shoved my 60K in happily, and he snap called with top set, which sent me packing back to 100, 200, 200, 400 for a while before I tried those stakes again. Back in 2013 or so, we were playing online, 200, 400 PLO heads up. And at this point, at PLO specifically, I did feel like I was stronger than him as a player. And we've been playing for a little bit, and I returned the favor of the 300-600 game all those years ago, and I set him for 80K pot or so. And I immediately get a phone call from Phil Ivey. And so I look, and I'm like, I don't know, we're playing heads up online. The decisions come fast. I don't really want to answer the phone. I don't like talking on the phone in general, but it's Phil Ivey, so I answer the phone. Hello, and he just says, "That easy, huh?" I just, awkwardly laugh, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, it is that easy. I didn't know how to hang up, and he just kept talking. And we're still playing 200, 400. There's very high stakes, there's 120,000 on the table at least. I'm thinking to myself, he's probably gonna get reads on me through the phone. I really don't wanna be on the call, but I was also too, I guess, nervous to hang up on him. So we just sat and played there for a while, talking about, I don't know what, I don't really remember. Looking back on that, I just think that, the combination of the fear that Phil Ivey strikes in his opponents, that intimidation factor that he has going on, combined with his fearlessness, really creates a disparity in focus, because he has his opponents uncomfortable, uneasy, whereas he appears to be completely fearless at the table and just make whatever play he thinks is best. He's also intimidating off the poker table, and it happens to be his sense of humor as well. So we're filming Poker After Dark at the Aria, and we had a dinner break and went to get sushi. It was Phil, a couple other players, and myself. And we place our orders, and the waiter comes out after a little while and says, "Hey, I'm sorry, your food's not ready yet. The sushi cart is backed up." And Phil, without missing a beat, just says, "The sushi cart's backed up. I lose $3 million here this week and the sushi cart's backed up." Okay. And I'm sitting there and I don't know if he's serious. Maybe he was playing craps earlier and he lost $3 million. I don't know. Waiter's uncomfortable. Nobody's saying anything. And then he smiles and we realize that he's joking. He probably enjoys intimidating people at the poker table, and I think he seems to enjoy it off the table as well. There was a site, High Stakes DB, that tracked the results in all the online high stakes games, and they would have a leaderboard every year of the biggest winners and biggest losers, and over time a leaderboard. And in 2008, I had my best year ever online. I won about 8 million, and I remember it being December of that year, and I was second on the leaderboard to Phil Ivey, and I really wanted to beat him, and I put in extra hours just trying to, essentially get lucky to have a big heater at the end. He was maybe $1 million ahead of me or less. It didn't happen. I finished in second, and I talked to him about it later, referencing the leaderboard race, and he had no idea what I was talking about. He'd never heard of the site. He didn't know that he was the biggest winner that year. He didn't care. So after playing a lot with Ivey at the high stakes online, it was really interesting because he had the highest continuation bet percentage of everybody that we played. And normally when somebody has an extreme stat like that, it means that they're making a mistake. And in theory, he was making a mistake, but it just worked for him. He just crushed. There was nobody else that I played against that would bet the flop so often and bet the turn so often. And it's funny that one random hand is stuck in my mind where I check called twice with bottom pair in a spot where he c-bet twice with an under pair to top pair and then check back the river and won. His style really frustrated me and I had a hard time adjusting to it. People think about how Phil's a good hand reader, they think about how he's fearless. Nobody talks or thinks about how smart he is. And I mean, you kind of have to be extremely intelligent to play at the level that he plays at. But because he doesn't talk about poker, he's never really talking strategy. And actually the few times that he doesn't speak in the way that my generation of online people speak about hand analysis. I think people don't realize just how incredibly intelligent he is. If you're going to be one of the best in the world, you just have to be extremely smart. There's no way around it.
Staying interested and wanting to educate yourself and learn new things is really been a big part of my life. But the problem is that once I get into something, I really get into it. You know, like if I start like a video game, I have to set a timer because I'll play the video game all day.
Whenever I played against Ivey, he was one of only 2 people, the other one being Victor Blom, who I felt like were a step ahead of me in the leveling war. Yes, that requires EQ. You need to understand how people think and how people tick, but it requires a lot of IQ as well. You need to think about what the implications of how people might adjust would be. You have to think about all of the things that have happened in recent history at the table or, long-standing history at the table, how your opponent might react then, what you should do about it. And I mean, he's just a killer at that. There's no other way to put it.
I wanted to win so bad. Like I paid attention to every single detail of everything that was going on in the game. And being focused and trying really hard, like I didn't realize until I went through a phase where I wasn't trying very hard, I didn't realize how hard I tried. You don't see many people with that. A lot of things like I took for granted, like being able to like understand people's energies and like body language stuff and I just knew intuitively.
One thing I noticed about Phil and his game after the advent of poker solvers is that he started taking more unorthodox lines. He wasn't the studious type in the same way that a lot of my generation were. He wasn't studying the solvers. He wasn't analyzing stats. I don't think he had a database of stats like the rest of us did when he played online, but he noticed that other players were, and he saw them getting better and more comfortable in all of these normal lines. And so it was kind of like he's taking them out of the boxing ring where there's like technicalities and just into a street fight where he knew that he could one-up them if everybody had to think on the fly. And I loved seeing that from him because I agree with him that, in the post-solver era, a lot of people feel there's only one way to play, but you can absolutely get people outside of their comfort zones and outside of the lines that they've studied backwards and forwards into spots where you're playing poker like we used to, a decade and a half, 2 decades ago. That's the kind of poker that I think is the most fun. It's clearly the kind of poker that Phil Ivey thinks is the most fun, and it's also where his strengths lie.
And what a fold there by Ivey. Checks back the flop and just folds to the overbet on the turn, and he is correct.
I would bet a lot of money that pre-2018, 2019, maybe 2020, Phil Ivey wasn't studying with any of the tools that the online guys were. To see him continue to compete in the high roller tournaments against players who are so technically sound at a game that is so technical. Like when you're playing 300 big blinds deep in a cash game, you can take people to the streets. But when you're playing 15 big blinds deep in a high roller tournament, you need to understand the technicalities. So I don't know if he's started studying with solvers, but he's still managing to compete with everybody. And so it would definitely not surprise me if he's been looking at some charts finally. Phil Ivey's a bit of an enigma, I think, to many. His personality is not well known to the public. He's mostly just stoic at the poker table. But I have hung out with him a couple of times and gotten to know him. So I was living in New York, and Phil Ivey was in town, as was Lars Luzak, Semi Kelaboro. So my friend and I met up with Lars and his friend for drinks around the corner from my condo. We started drinking our drinks, and Lars or his friend had already gone back to the bar and gotten the next round, and had somehow finished theirs in the meantime. So I was trying really hard to keep up. I'm not a very big guy, I don't drink that much, and it was hitting me pretty hard. By the time we met with Phil Ivey at dinner, I was pretty drunk. And obviously at dinner there were more drinks, and after dinner was the club. The cocktail waiters would bring a round of shots, and everybody would grab one. My friend knew we had already had too much, so he was, before taking the shots, he just dumped it on the ground, and then we would all take the shot. He was just pretending. But the second time that he did it, when he looked up after the shot, he's locked eyes with Phil Ivey, who was looking right back at him. No expression, but he noticed. I was not dumping my shots, and long story short is I actually don't remember a lot of the rest of the night. But what I do remember, Phil Ivey had a driver and a car for the day, and I was sitting in the front seat of that car and just like barely awake. Some time passed, probably, and I found myself throwing up all over the front seat of this car. We pulled over, all got out. I saw Phil just throwing, I don't know how many hundreds at the driver, saying, "I'm sorry, you know, this is to clean the car." We all got in cabs and made our way home. The interesting part of the story to me about Phil is that next morning he called me. He asked how I was doing. He asked if I was okay. And I mean, I think 20-30% was he thought it was funny, and he was kind of laughing at me. But I do think 70-80% of that was that he was making sure that I was okay. He was checking up on me. You know, nobody else there that night called me to see how I was doing. So I thought that was thoughtful of him. Plus, he got to laugh at me. Phil Ivey's arguably the greatest of all time. I still felt as though I held my own against him. I don't know if at times I felt like I was better than him or worse than him, but I usually was intimidated by him at the tables. I definitely feel as though he had my number when it comes to results. There are just some people that you play against online that the big pots tend to go their way over a long period of time. And I think it's mostly variance, but it certainly gets in your head. And Phil Ivey was one of the few who seemed to beat me far more often than not. I mean, how did he do it? He's extremely innately talented. And even if he wasn't studying in the same way that we did, I can tell that he's driven, and I'm sure that he worked hard in whatever way that was. I don't know what way that was, honestly. It's still a mystery to me. 90% of the reason that he crushed is just pure talent.